Folks, welcome back inside the Parisi Palace, high above 2919 East Broadway. It's a high wire act today. Thank you to my engineer, Oscar Baca, for keeping everything remotely under control, but we are perspiring heavily after a huge African drum circle, and now we're getting ready to go into hour number 2, and we thank you for being part of the program today. My guest today has done it and seen it all. He has been in music for over a half a century. He has watched the music industry shrink into a business. He has seen jazz go from popular music to a classicalized medium, taught in schools instead of on the bandstand. He held down the fort at the Baked Potato back when there were dozens of clubs to play in Southern California. He was also part of the vaunted Wrecking Crew with Hal Blaine, Earl Palmer, Larry Knechtel, Tommy Tedesco, and Carol Kay. His trio plus one often featured Hal Gordon, and the group would stretch out and play Motown, blues, straight ahead, funky soundtracks, and boogie woogie. Most importantly, my guest has been on a quest to be a link in the change for future generations' understanding of how real music is made. In other words, play quality notes instead of quantity, feel the groove, trust the accompanists, and play music. If you need a country western flair, he puts you in the mood. If you need some soul vamping, he can do that too. Play sweet ballads for a soundtrack, there you go. He's a master of all trades and continues to teach, play, and inspire. One hot potato, Don Randi, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, Jake. It's been a long time. I'm glad we finally got it together.
Me too, brother man, and I got to tell you, it is an honor to have you on the program. You know, I wanted to ask you, first off, a little bit about the music that you were listening to, maybe some of the radio stations you grew up on in the Catskills.
You mean what I'm listening to now?
No, when you were in the Catskills, when you were...
Oh, when I was in the Catskills?
Yeah, what kind of music were you getting off on?
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, when I was in the Catskills, it was my education came from my father. He was in show business, but he also owned a restaurant up there, and he loved music. And he actually had one of the first places that had speakers outside the restaurant that when you were walking by, you could hear music. And he loved all kinds of music. And the first jazz I heard was Nat Cole playing piano and singing. So that was the first time I was, listening to it. I was studying classical music in those days. And then, of course, a little later on, Dave Brubeck came along. But Nat Cole was one of my father's favorites, and became one of my favorites.
Can you talk a little bit about the benefits of, I talked to one of the Bowie brothers, Lester's younger brother Joseph last night, and just the idea of the fact that there were no jazz curriculums at the time, how that kind of helped you specifically develop your own sound?
Well, for me it was a little different because I had to support myself when I was going to college. When I left New York, I went to school in Los Angeles at the LA Conservatory of Music, and I basically had to pay my own way. And I went to work for a record distributing company. It couldn't have been a better job because they distributed all the East Coast jazz like Riverside, Prestige, Blue Note. And then they distribute all the West Coast jazz. So that's all I got to listen to all day long while I was studying classical music.
Wow.
And then I said, I got to try and play that. So, that's how I did it. And when I was a kid, I was accompanying acts, and they always had kind of pop songs. If they weren't Yiddish songs, they were pop songs,
Can you go a little bit deeper for the audience insofar as what you heard in jazz that made you want to play it?
Well, I had a problem when I was playing classical music with two different teachers because I always was interpreting what the composer said. I would want to play it softer where they wanted to play it louder, or I wanted to play it faster or slower, stuff like that. And they said, you can't do that. You can't interpret the classical music the way you want. It wasn't written like that. And I found it restricting. And I said, you know what? When I started to listen to jazz and the freedom of it, and the possibility of the first chorus being one thing, and then you're rewriting that the second, third, and fourth, and it's always it's like you're a composer composing on your improvisation, and I loved it from the first day I tried to play it, and ever since.
Do you think that those teachers, I'm not a musician, so I just want to ask you, they said you can't interpret classical music on your own. Do you think that was just,
Sure.
do you think that was just their insecurity? I don't know if I buy into that.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was in school, one of my teachers was, my woodwinds teacher was a guy by the name of William Green, who was an incredible jazz musician, but he could also play classical music. He played sax in a symphony or sax on stage in a jazz band. And then he had all those different kind of embouchures that he could use. And I just would watch him and listen to his, his inventiveness in class and his interpretation of things. And it was a big influence on me. He never knew it, but I did. The experimentation you get with jazz is like nothing else. That's why I'll tell you an interesting story. I have a friend of mine who has a couple of the greatest cover bands in the world. I mean, when they cover it, you think you're hearing and listening to the exact copy of what it is, what the real thing was. And when I would do it, I would try and put something of myself into it. And that's why I could never do a cover band, because I can't always play it the same. I want to experiment. If I have to play it the same, I will. If I'm paid to do that, I certainly can do that. But if I have to do it on stage or something like that, I always want to put some more of myself in. I can't be that restricted.
This is interesting because when I talked to Don a couple weeks ago on the phone, I wanted you to talk a little bit about the African element of jazz, the freedom that was being expressed, especially in the 60s, coming off and into the civil rights movement, and then juxtapose that to modern day black music, which is rap, although you really have a problem, and I want you to talk.
I have a problem with what you just said.
Go ahead.
You can say rap rhythm, but don't say rap music in the same sentence.
No. I wanted you to, we talked about this, so I wanted you to break off why you believe that. I think it's important.
I think it's important that there is no composition. The composition is repetitive. It's rude. And, some of it it's very infectious, and I can understand why young people would want to go for that, because it's like watching cartoons. You don't have to think about anything.
Right.
So it's kind of mindless to me, and it doesn't work, and fortunately I'm not alone in that. You could have bet me a lot of money that about rap, because I thought this was just a fad that was going to be around for, about a year or two. But it sure surprised everybody, and it's become a gigantic industry, Well, so you can't knock it from that end, but I can say it's not my preference. I'd rather listen to anybody, anything else like that. I mean, I'll listen to Maroon 5. I'll listen to Green Day. I'll listen to, the other day, on one of our local channels, they were playing 60s music, and I was on 7 different cuts in a row that they played. And 2 of them were Motown. It was such good music, and it was the lyric content was so meaningful. So it's a big difference. I have been taken off my own records and off a couple of David Axelrod's records, and they've used my piano solos on rap records, which I never got paid for.
Well, I'm going to ask you something, okay, because this is important. Okay, so explain why it should not be called music, but rather go the other way. Talk to younger cats out there.
I think rhythmically it's exciting. If you want to forget about what it is and you don't care how rude it could be and you don't care what the lyric content is, sure. But it's not my cup of tea. It never will be. That's the big difference for me. I can't get into it. I can listen to it for about a minute and a half, and then it's over with, and yet all kids can get into it, and a lot of the jazz musicians that I know are into it also, because they feel that it's okay. I guess I'm too old.
No, Don, I think here's the thing, okay? the fact is that the last couple of generations have had electronic beats forced into their ears. They can't really hear the swing element of the music. So I want you to talk to younger cats about the infectious qualities of melodic invention, namely jazz and the kind.
Well,
yeah, please.
Sure,
yeah.
sure. There is. First of all, there's nothing like going to hear live music, and what makes it what's so exciting about that is the element of something can go wrong, and when that something goes wrong, that becomes another part of it, and you can play off that mistake or that glitch or whatever it was, and all of a sudden you're in a whole other place, and the audience goes right with it because they don't really know what had just happened, but they love it. And what triggered that was somebody not doing something the way they could have done, and that makes the song entirely different. And that possibility doesn't happen when you're digitally recording and doing all of that stuff, because all your music becomes digital impulses, and there's no place to go.
Can you talk about a time in your career when you had a glitch and turned it into a new portal, a new avenue of creativity?
Sure. That's a great question. On a record called Sound of a Different Drum, which was Linda Ronstadt and the Stone Ponies. Mm-hmm. If I had not had an education of understanding what any kind of music was, and not had the music background, all that music said was chord changes for the song. But when it came my part, I was playing harpsichord on that. The harpsichord solo on that record is me playing that. And all my music said was Baroque style. Now, if I didn't have an education, I would have not even known what that meant. So I had to do that. And in the process of doing it, I was a little rock and roll, and then I realized that they were serious. So I had to change my approach completely. I was making a mistake trying to make too much like a folk rock thing, and they wanted me to go out and out and play a Baroque style, a Bach style solo. And it's an example of that. I'll give you another example. About 2 months ago, I had an overdub on a record to some young producer, and I made a little mistake the first time, and then we finished the whole song, and I said to the guy, can we go back? I just want to fix that one little thing. He says, no, but let's go on to the next song. I said, just go back and let me just fix that. He says, no, Don, you don't have to worry about it. And I said, yeah, but it's a mistake. He says, no, it's not a mistake. What we will do is cut and paste from the second chorus or third chorus because you played the same thing 3 different times. So I lost that battle. All they'll do is just take me out and drop in digitally what I did the second time onto what the first time was. So it's a whole other attitude about the style of recording, the way you're going, and all of that. So what can I tell you?
Well, but I think it's important.
It's a different world, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are definitely in a different age. But like Emil Richards, when I went to visit him in Lake Toluca, he was talking about, a singer could say, could go through a couple of tunes and then yell up to the producer, how did I sound? And they'll say, terrible. Come on up, we'll fix it. You can fix everything now, but yet that takes away from the authenticity of the actual playing. Emil would say, as a percussionist, would they be doing, they'd be in there 4, 5, 6 hours, and maybe they're doing a Flintstones jingle or something, and he screwed up the mallet. Yes. He screwed up the mallet,
sure.
And everybody's ready to go home, and he'd raise his hand and say, I'm sorry, but I screwed up. We got to do it again. Because he didn't want to hear that mistake. He didn't want to hear it. And I just feel like you guys were just masters of yeah. Go ahead.
Our capabilities. You picked one of my favorite players, Emil Richards. I love him, and we worked together on quite a few different kinds of dates over the years. But it's so true. And then again, there were some producers that they didn't care about that because it felt good. They didn't care if there was a little glitch note or anything, but the overall thing felt so good that they didn't want to go back and risk changing it. So you have to look at from that point too, that point of view, where a producer who was in charge of, doing his record, he may say, yeah, you did make a mistake, but it doesn't mean anything. On some of Herb Alpert's early records, Herb was one of those kind of guys. If it felt good, just let it go. Go with the flow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that way. I would want to correct it. But, sometimes those things are only noticeable to us. It's not noticeable to the listening audience, so to speak.
Yeah,
but it still bothers me,
No, I mean, that's what Emil was saying was nobody might notice it, but every time I got to hear that mistake, I don't want to do that. So I'm sorry, but I got to do it. I mean, I'm from this generation. It's a cut and paste generation. It's efficiency over quality. It's just getting it done, cost cutting. I mean, there is some sanity. Can you talk about a little bit of the insanity of the budgets that were going on at one time, especially with the Wrecking Crew, where you were like, I mean, there'd be 50 or 70 heady musicians in one session. I mean, the anarchy and the beauty of that it's not there anymore.
It was incredible, and we all were not greedy with each other. We all got along very well. If they couldn't get me to do a date, they could get Larry Nectar or Leon Russell or Mike Rubini or something. There was enough work for all of us. And then, of course, when you worked for Phil Spector, there was 5 of us sometimes, 4 of us doing the same thing. And the same thing with the guitars. There were 4 or 5 guitar players. So if you got to work for those certain accounts where you were making hit records and doing all of that, you worked all the time. And that's how we became the Wall of Sound with Phil Spector. And later on, it became the Wrecking Crew, the same guy. And we were capable of giving them what they wanted. We weren't embarrassed by what we had to play. And sometimes it was tedious, but we had no right to say not. We were getting paid very well for it.
Right. When I interviewed Hal Blaine, you guys, I'm sure you were in that boat as well. A lot of records, you didn't even get credits on the back of the album. And I was like, from my generation or myself, I would be really upset if I played piano on 9 out of 11 tracks and my name didn't show up as the piano player. But Hal said to me, it didn't bother us because we all saw our families elevating economically. We were all growing. We had nice houses. There was a selfless component to it that was, I think, really refreshing. The question I have, Don, is when Motown came out, in the early 70s to Los Angeles, how did you get locked into the Motown scene?
That's a good question. I got the call, one of the first calls. Well, evidently, Barry Gordy had heard about some of the tracks that we were doing for Phil Spector. And when they came out, I forget the artist. I don't know if it was the Temptations or who it was, but it was a big date. And Ernie Freeman, I think, was the arranger, or H.B. Barnum was. And I worked for H.B. Barnum a lot in those days, and he was doing all kinds of different artists. And on this one date, I was hired by H.B. to be the piano player. And I remember it was incredible. I think the drummer was either Johnny Guerin or Ed Green on that. Or no, it might have been Earl Palmer.
Mm-hmm.
And the bass player was from Detroit.
James Jamerson?
James Jamerson from the Funk Brothers, yeah. And he was incredible. And that was, I'll tell you a story about that first date. When we finished the date, this guy opens up a briefcase, and it's loaded with cash, and he starts taking out cash to pay the musicians. And I'm saying, what are you doing? He said, well, this is how we do it in Detroit. I said, well, you can't do that in Los Angeles. You have to have a union contract. It has to be on a contract. As I'm saying that, these 2 giant black arms came along and were hugging me and kept saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. And it was James Jamerson.
Wow.
Because they got in Detroit, those poor guys got nothing. When they go to try and collect residuals, it's not nice. It's not nice at all. They should have all been wealthy from all those records they were doing. But, that's the way they did it.
So when Jamerson came out there, he was hugging you for the sanity that you were, because there was a system set up there, and they were.
Oh,
So, I mean, why was there no, I don't want to get into the too esoteric thing, but Berry Gordy, I always thought he did take care of his people there, but they did not get paid for it.
He didn't take care of the musicians as well as he could have.
Right.
And you have to understand, too, from the economical side, they needed that money, whatever it was. Whatever they got paid to do those sessions, they needed that money.
Is it true?
So they had to,
yeah.
They had to accept it, you know.
No, I mean, when I talked, do you remember like when you put in an application for to rent an apartment or buy a house, if you put not just musician, but if you put composer, you'd get a better chance of getting a mortgage?
You know what the best chance was? If you put teacher down. You had a better chance. If you put down musician, composer, you were up the creek, so to speak, you know. What about dating a girl? Oh, you're going to go out with a musician? You know, it was not very well looked upon, so to speak. And when if you didn't have a giant bank account, you couldn't get a loan. And you had a that was just the way it was, you know. It hasn't changed that much, believe me. If you're still a musician, if you're a young musician, and you want to even get a loan to buy a computer or whatever it is, it's still a problem.
You know, can you talk in real terms? Forget the digitization of music, but is it? Would you say it? If Don Randi was 19, coming from the Catskills out to Los Angeles, what kind of terrain would he be facing as it relates to the music business as it is now?
You want me to say if I was coming here now in today's date?
Yeah, is it more daunting than when you came out there in the?
You know, I do quite a few seminars in different places, different schools, and to talk to the kids all the time. And I don't know how they do it, because when I was a kid, when I came out, I could get an apartment for $200. These kids have to have 4 and 5 kids together in one apartment just to pay for the apartment. They all have to have electronic devices. They also have to live. They have to buy food. And it's not easy. So if you don't have some kind of affluency in your family today, you're not going to get you'll get a student loan, but boy, you'll be paying for the rest of your life. I don't relish the fact that the arts are not as well looked on as they were in the earlier days. And they were looked on fantastically, especially when John F. Kennedy was president. I mean, he was the biggest booster we had for the arts and for music and for ballet and for writers and poets. He was just one of those kind of guys, you know. He was a great president. But, you know, a lot of it becomes, unfortunately, it has to do with politics. I mean, look at our schools today. They don't have musical instruments. I grew up in a little place called Woodridge, New York, and we had plenty of instruments through junior high school and high school. Now, if you want something, they'll tell you, especially out in California where I am, a lot of the schools will say, well, you have to go to a music store and rent an instrument or possibly buy one because we just don't have enough. Or we don't have any in a lot of cases. So it's a lot different. Believe me, it is. It's. I don't relish the fact if I had to study right now, I don't know if I could possibly do it. And I see so many kids get turned off, and because of that fact. And it's, to keep the inspiration of wanting to be creative, and you don't have any money, and you're starving, and you know you got to do something else at the same time. Either you make that as a fact of life that I have to work at something else while I'm building a career in music. That's the attitude you have to take. It's almost like you have to have 2 jobs to do the one job you really want to do.
Right.
But if you can survive through that and understand that's quite all right to do that. So you cook pizza in a restaurant. Who cares? But you still got to play. So if one thing helps the other, it's very good. These people say I'm starving for my occupation. It's wrong. I mean, if you have to survive, you survive, but don't give up your music. You know. Yeah, you do what you have to do.
You brought up an interesting point because going back to Emil again, I'm curious. He took Sinatra was instrumental in, or was a huge Kennedy supporter, and he told when Kennedy got they did a whole thing, a big commercial re-election for Kennedy, and when he did, he asked Sinatra if he would take his band on a goodwill tour of the Middle East, and Frank said, "Well, I'll do you one better. I'll take my private jet as long as we don't have to go through customs." And they went all the way through Israel and the Middle East, and actually an Arab-Israeli hospital was built because of that. I'm curious as if you ever went on any goodwill music tours in the world.
Hundreds of them, and especially with Frank. We would, I've been was with Nancy Sinatra till this present day, since these boots are made from walking. I was the piano player, and then I became her musical director. So I got to ride in that private jet with Frank many, many times. But also, I'd get a phone call, and Nancy says, "My dad says he wants to do this thing to help out Sugar Ray Robinson's foundation. So be ready, tell the guys to be ready." And we'd hop on a jet plane. The other guys would fly. We'd all meet in some city that was not planned on the tour, because we were opening for Frank at that point for about 3 years in a row. She opened the show for her dad. And we've been in a strange city, and all of a sudden here would be all these people. Thousands of people coming because Frank was going to do this charity thing. He paid the band out of his own pocket. And then we would go back in time to be on the show for the next night. Our night off, we would be we were in Atlantic City at that point, at Resorts International. And the next night, we were at some event in Chicago overnight, and then we came back the next morning, and that's the way it was.
Well, we're just getting started here, half past the hour with Don Randi. Don, we have a game on this program called Name That Tune. We're going to put this in, and we'll come back and break it down, okay?
Okay.
Delicious. Brad Elroy. Brad Elroy. Come with me.
Music on the Jake Feinberg Show, brought to you in part by my sponsors, Dee's Island Grill, Abbott Taylor Jewelers, the Circle Tree Ranch, and the Stereo Hospital. And we thank you for your support. Mr. Randi, what do you got for us?
Hello.
Hey, what do you
say?
What do you think that is?
What do I think that was? I have no idea.
That was a never before released 1973 porn movie called Stacy. Don Randi on keys. Do you remember that?
I wrote it.
Because I looked up this morning, I said, I love Don Randi baked potato. I know he's a funky guy, so I typed into YouTube Don Randi funk. Okay, Don Randi funk. First thing that came up, unreleased porn movie soundtrack, 1973, my favorite year of music, Stacy. Please break that session down for us, Mr. Randi.
Okay. I can do that. It was hard for me to hear.
I know. The quality wasn't that good. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me tell you something about that movie. Stacy was a film that the director was Andy Sedaris. Andy Sedaris was one of the most interesting human beings in the world. He passed away some years ago, but he was a mentor to me, and he got me a lot of work, an awful lot of work, and he helped me buy my house, as a matter of fact, because that's how much money I made just from the things he got me to do musically. He was one of the top sports directors on ABC. He was the guy that invented instant replay,
Wow.
stop action, all that stuff.
Wow.
When he was with Wide World of Sports and a couple of other shows on ABC. And he was a very famous, lovable guy. And he also got me a lot of sports themes that were on ABC television on Saturday for almost 5 years in a row. I had all the sports themes. We went in and we cut sports themes, but with like a hip jazz band, doing them. And it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Stacy was one of his first films. It was, I think, some Playmate of the Year or something was Stacy. And it was just one of those really F movies. I can't call it a C or a D.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I know what you mean.
It was released and went right to drive-ins,
But Don, let's go, like, for instance, like when somebody comes to you and says, we want you to put together some tunes for a porn film. How do you talk about the feelings that, because you told it best. I mean, I found this record the other day. It was Rubber Soul Jazz, right? So it's you guys, it's you guys doing Beatles tunes. You got to put your own feel into it. But I mean, that thing was. I mean, when someone comes to you with a task like that, can you talk about how you broke that down?
You picked a good one. Rubber Soul Jazz is one of my favorite albums I've ever done, and the idea for that was not mine. I love Beatle music, and somebody heard me playing a couple of tunes, and somebody was a guy by the name of Marshall Leib, who produced records. He became an independent producer, but he was one of the original Teddy Bears with Phil Spector and Annette. To Know Him Is to Love Him was the record that they did. It was on Annette Connors. And Marshall became a producer. He says, I got an idea. Let's do song for song Rubber Soul Jazz. And I just looked at him. I said, I love it. Let's go in and do it. And we did it for a little label that was owned, I think it was called Meerwood. And it was owned by the guy, Randy Wood, who owned BJ Records, who had a lot of hits in those days. And we put it out. And we sold over 100,000 records of that thing so fast. And I never saw one penny of it.
Wow, dude, what the heck?
Not a dime. We got paid for the session. I think Hal was on some of it. One of my original drummer, John Porter, was on some of it. But it was one of those kind of records. And then we did Revolver Jazz later on, too. I did that for Warner Brothers Reprieve. But I always was a little ahead of the curve on that stuff. And I got put down by everybody. Every jazz critic in the world says, how can you do that? That's rock and roll. You can't mix rock and roll and jazz, and you can't do this. But when you think about it, I did do it. And guess what they call that now?
Fusion?
Do you know what they call it?
Fusion?
Fusion.
Yeah, I mean, that word can be, that.
So it was one of the first fusion albums that was ever recorded. And then a year later, everybody and their mother was recording Beatles tunes. I think that was 1963, if I remember correctly, 62 or 63 when we did that. That's when the Beatles had kind of taken over, everybody was listening to the Beatles, Capitol Records.
Did you wind up, when I look at Blaine's discography in the 60s, he was playing with some bluegrass, or sometimes he would be playing with Russian, ethnic Russian music. Did you get off, or were you involved at all with, the Beatles? You brought up the Beatles, polyrhythmic music. Did you play any Indian music with Bill Plummer or anybody like that?
Yeah, Bill Plummer was in my band for a little while. He was in my trio.
Break it down.
But I didn't get into the
polyrhythm,
all the Indian stuff that he had got into. I had another bass player, Hersh Hamill, who played sitar very well too, But I just kept it when I had my piano trios. That's what it was. And then I added a percussionist, a conga player, Hal Gordon. He was the first one to play with me. I added an instrument. But I always enjoyed live music. I had a Steinway B for years at the Baked Potato, and many people recorded on that piano, including myself. And I finally ended up to be the only person playing here that used the acoustic piano. And it became such a pain in the neck to have to take it down, put it up, take it down, put it up, that finally I switched over to electronics myself.
When did you?
It was not easy to do.
When did you get your first Fender Rhodes?
Oh, that's a good question. The first Fender Rhodes I got, I think, was in probably around. The ones that I owned was around 72, 73, maybe.
Right around that, right around the time of the making of Stacy.
Yeah,
yeah,
right around that same time.
You know, I want you to. It's so important because so many of these iconic clubs, there was a propensity of live venues and people that ran these clubs and restaurants that viewed musicians as a profession as opposed to a pay for play kind of mentality. And I just wanted you to talk about, in your mind, even though it's still going, at the core, the significance of the Baked Potato as a live music venue and the significance it had for communal music.
First of all, no one ever had to pay to play here, ever. And I hated that attitude, but I still don't understand it, but I guess I can put up with it because it's still going on in a lot of places. But we always paid. We paid union scale or more until we decided we were going to go with a door charge, which was not an easy move for me to do because I hated door charges, but it actually worked out for the best. And it's been that way for the last 30 years, 35 years.
Why
where
did
people
why
pay,
did,
pay at the door, and the band gets that money, not the club, the band.
Mm-hmm.
We get a percentage of it. We get 20% of that door, but the band gets the rest. That's a very good deal. We don't ask anybody to give us any money up front or to guarantee us anything. We've already learned that lesson. They can't guarantee. Nobody can guarantee anything. So, but the guys like to work here. They like to work for the door. And a lot of people have stayed with us for years. Larry Carlton comes back and plays. Lee Ritenour. Now we have a new guy, Joe Bonamassa, loves to play here. So, you know, it develops over the years. And we've had some of the greatest jazz players of all time. You know, I used to love to come in here Sunday nights because Harry Sweets Edison played every Sunday night with an incredible band. And I'd come in, you know, and you can't go wrong. And Sweets would have some dynamite musicians. I'd sit in every once in a while. But he was lovely. And then you get all these different players. Joe Sample started here, you know. So did Al Jarreau. You know, you can't. And my buddy would come. One night we're playing, the place is packed, and this African-American gentleman walks in, and he's at the door, and I see who it is, and he's seating people. And it was Lou Wall. Because I figured I couldn't get a seat, so I might as well help other people find where they want to go. He had about 5 or 6 people with him. And then, of course, if he's going to come in there, he knows he's got to get up and sing.
Right.
So we had a ball, you know. And I did quite a few albums with Lou Wall.
You know, I wanted
Capital.
You went back. You talked about something earlier about being taken to the woodshed by the critics about, you know, not being a purist or playing, you know, mixing different genres. But do you remember? Could you talk to the audience about, you know, for instance, like, you know, in today's world, Mingus or Bird or Train, you know, they're like idols, and they're everyone transcribes their stuff, but at the time, people were really ticked off about their music. Is that right? I mean, I've heard that from a bunch of people that when they came to different places, people were pissed because they were making up their own music. And I wanted to know from your point of view about that.
Unfortunately, people just don't understand a lot of what a jazz musician goes through, what the freedom of experimentation is in playing. And either you live with it or you don't live with it. There's no in between. I became an in between because I figured if I want to reach that audience and give them a taste of what jazz is, and a taste of what rock and roll is, or a taste of what a pop standard is, I didn't jam it down their throats. Whereas a lot of guys just wouldn't give up anything. Whereas I didn't feel like I was selling out, but I felt I was making a bridge between if I want to play milestones, or if I want to play, some out bebop tune, that if I played a Beatles tune first, and then maybe did a blues, and then hit it with a really hard bebop tune, it worked. They said, "Wow, what was that?" So you have to lead them into it. And with live performances, I've always felt that I can read an audience pretty well. And I think the audience enjoys that too, because, it's not like you're teaching them anything, but you're giving them the possibility of hearing something they normally wouldn't have heard, No,
I dig. I mean, that's the Jake Feinberg school of music, really. If I actually was a musician, that to me, it's just about a diverse. But you didn't feel like you were selling out, whereas cats like Mingus, and especially when Train was going. Did you see Train play ever live?
No, but I have quite a few of his albums, and when I was working at the record distributor, I would hear the Red Garland play with Coltrane. I would hear all these wonderful things, and you get sit there and say, "Oh my God, how fantastic that is!" But that was their thing. That was their thing. Nobody's going to outdo a Charlie Parker solo. They might try, and I give them a lot of credit for trying. There's so many great players. And it's. I always think. I listen to a lot of young. There's a jam night at the Baked Potato. It's been that way for the last 9 years on Monday night, and I'll come in and listen to it. And there's not really any jazz players. They're all blues players, or they want to be a guitar sounder like Stevie Ray Vaughan. And it bothers me, but that's what they have to do. They think that's what they have to do. And then every once in a while, you hear somebody get up there, some young kid, and just play absolutely incredible, and that's what you live for. You're not going to hear the number one every time.
That's right. No, I appreciate you putting it in perspective for me, actually. There's two cats. I wanted you to tell me, there's, a lot of my show is predicated on, the Duke Ellington School of Music. It's either good or bad, but there's a lot of cats that wound up to be prolific, like you, session guys, but they grew up obsessed with jazz, and they grew up obsessed watching and playing jazz. And I was hoping you could tell me could you tell me a good story about Jim Keltner, the first time you either played with him? Did you ever play any jazz with him?
He joined my band. It was his first gig.
Please tell me that story.
We were working at a club called Sherry's in Hollywood, and he came and joined my band. And a guy that would substitute piano for me was named Leon Russell, because I was doing a session. So Leon is playing one night, and he gets to play with Jim Keltner. And the next day, Leon called me and says, "Holy crap, what a great player that guy is." I said, "I know." He said, "Well," he says, "he's going to go far." I said, "I know it." I said, "It's just a matter of time." About 3 weeks later, Jim Keltner comes to me and says, "I got offered this gig, Don. I don't know whether to take it. What do you think?" It's with Gary Lewis and the Playboys. And Leon says, it would work out. I said, "Take it." And that's how it started. And then I love Jim. I hear from him all the time, and we stay pretty close.
Yeah, no, he says, he really grew up. He was playing with a lot of cats, man. He was
Sure.
playing in South Central during the riots, with all these guys. And he was going to see Bobby Hutcherson and Charles Lloyd at the Dragon Wick Club, and just doing
Sure.
all sorts of crazy stuff. The other guy I wanted to ask you about was the drummer for the Doors, John Densmore. He was a real jazz. Did you ever cross paths with John?
No, I never did, but I had heard about him, that he was a jazzer. The guy that surprised me was Charlie Watts. He came and sat in with us one night at Sherry's. He came in with Jack Ritchie. And he just sat down and had a lovely ride and had great control of his hands,
Yeah, well,
And I would have never expected that, but he did.
yeah. For people that don't know, Charlie Watts was the drummer for the Rolling Stones, and so
Yes.
just the idea that he could swing his butt off like that is unbelievable.
Sure.
We got another Name That Tune for you, Randy. So just sit tight and we'll break it down, okay?
Okay, if you can play it just a little. Well, I don't know if I can hear it just a little louder. That would be great.
You got it. You got it. All right, Mr. Randi, could you hear that okay?
Yeah, it could. Kind of great.
What do you think it is?
Well, I don't know. It sounds like the trumpet player. If it's not Maynard Ferguson, it's somebody like him.
It was Bobby Bryant.
Bobby Bryant. Oh yeah.
That was
Great player.
From 1977 off the David Axelrod album "Strange Ladies."
That might be me playing piano on that.
You're playing some wild, cool, like chromatic, electric kind of funk. Can you break down? Axelrod gets a huge amount of credit for these compositions, but can you talk about whether, in fact, was it a collaborative effort when you worked with him? Because his stuff holds up better today than maybe it even did back then.
Yeah. You know what? I'll tell you a great story from that date that we were doing. Oh God, I got to remember his name. A great tenor player that was in that band also. That Bobby Bryant did that solo on. Oh, I can't remember now, but he had written a whole bunch of long notes for the orchestra to play.
Was it Ernie Watts?
Ernie Watts, yes, it was. And he had written, if you're a musician and you're a horn player, when you're reading, we call them potato notes that are whole notes tied to one another. And it goes on forever, and you don't have a breath. When you finally get a breath, you take a quick breath, and you're right back to doing it again. And we finished doing, the third time in a row, this one tune that was about 5 minutes long. And Ernie Watts stood up and said, I used to pay a lot of money to feel this way. He was hyperventilating, and the whole band cracked up. It was great, and it was true. But Dave was an interesting guy. He left us alone. He left the freedom. He would orchestrate certain things, but as far as going for it, that's what he would say: go for it on the part. On many different records. I think I must have done about 9 different albums with him.
Yeah. And
then with the Lou Rawls stuff, and then he produced an album with me on Capitol.
Do you think the hands-off style? Can you talk about the freedom that lends itself to creative musicians?
Well, with certain guys that respected the musicians, I knew what they had in the band. They would say they could rely on it. It made it easier for an arranger or for a producer or for somebody like that. I don't think the singers quite understood it a lot of times. Lou Rawls did, and Al Jarreau did. Maybe a few others might have, but the more of the rock singers relied the musicians, to be there, but they didn't really understand the importance of it till they got a hit record.
That's right.
Then they really appreciated it.
The other cat I wanted to ask you about was Willie Hutch. Did you play with Willie?
No, never.
But you covered some of his tunes, though.
I may have.
Yeah.
I may have.
Don, I'd like you to talk a little bit about, for some people that may not realize this, Don Randi really has been, prolifically playing and making a livelihood in music for the last half century. And can you talk a little bit about this year, sort of a transcendent moment that you've had either live or in the studio playing music?
Yeah, yes, I can. Well, first of all, there's a film out called The Wrecking Crew. And I've been going around with Denny Tedesco and helping him get the film, and it finally come out, and it's doing very well. And you'll be able to get it this month on DVD. And it comes with about 6 hours of outtakes that are absolutely incredible. You'll find out things about the music industry that you never had an idea of. And it's a wonderful story of music of the 60s. So I've been doing that a lot. But I still get called. I go to Iceland. There's a guy there by the name of Geir Olafsson who has a gigantic, great 22-piece swing band up there. And I'll go up and play it, and I'll arrange some stuff for him. And I've done a number of albums with him. And this last few times, I've been able to bring rhythm sections from California there. Bernie Dressel did a couple with me. My Tom Breckline has done a couple of dates with me up there. So it makes it fun. I enjoy doing that. And I'll still get called to do sessions, And I love it, although it's so impersonal when you do them today, because You go in and nobody's there but you and the producer and the engineer, and you put your part down and you thank you and you go home. You know, there's no other musicians. Usually it's an overdub part. So it's not the way it was done, and it's completely different. Completely different.
Different in a, but not as
Well,
good.
You know, if you and I are talking, we're talking like we're sitting across from each other. And we can only do that because of the technical capability of what you're doing. But when you go into the studio now, it's the same thing. They're in the booth, you're in the studio, and you're playing an electric keyboard or electric synthesizer, and it's going directly into the booth, back and forth. There's not a bass player, there's not a drum. You're listening to a track, and that's it. It's cold, and it's very formal.
We have cooked through the first hour here with Don Randi, but Don, before I let you go, one of the 4 L's of my show is love, and I was just hoping you could talk about how your concept of love and ultimately how you bring love to people in your life.
Well, I'll tell you how I bring love to people in my life. There's a word that I think that everybody should say when they first get up in the morning. It's a 4-letter word. It's called kind, K-I-N-D. If you want to add the EX, kindness. Think of something kindness to say to somebody, or to do for somebody, or to help somebody. If you wake up and you're already negative when you wake up, you're in a deep lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
You have to think, not so much positively, but in a kinder mood, you know, because you're going to get aggravated during the day if you're a human being. But you'll be able to deal with it better if you start out, what can I do today that's not going to hurt anybody, you know? And that's the way I look at my life. I have a lot of children. My wife and I have had 14 foster kids that have all been drug addicts.
Wow.
From day one. And seen them through the worst periods of their life. And then they go back to their parents or to grandma or whoever. But my wife especially has seen them through recuperation and recovery. And then it's a very hard thing, but you have to give that child up most of the time. All of the time. And fortunately, we follow through with these people. Our own kids. My daughter, Leah, was the bass player and backup singer with Pink for a number of years. My son, David, was in a band called Damn Machine. My other son, Justin, who runs the baked potato for me, has a band called Nothing Personal. So it's involved. It's involved.
Randy, I listen, man. We'll do it again real soon. I had a ball, man. Thank you so much for taking the time today, brother.
Thank you, Jake, and keep doing it because people like to talk to you, you know?
I like talking to you, man. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
The Jake Feinberg Show. Come back next week. Peace.
I'd like for everybody to get together and all of us play the blues. Let's have a good time. Because blues is where it's at. I'm telling you, I love it. I can't help but play it. So when you wake up in the morning,
you're a gig.